Okay, I think we'll get started. So welcome everybody. I'm going to put everybody on mute and ask our speakers to unmute yourselves. Good evening. I'm Andrew Reamer, head of Gvarim, and welcome to Policy and Politics, which is the first in a series that we're going to have over this winter and spring. Tonight's conversation is really a mirror to the one we held a month before the election, the annual Politics and Beer in the Sukkah, which this year featured Bill Galston and Ira Foreman and was moderated by Howard Gleckman. So now we're here a month after the election, and we're going to move the words and the people around a bit. We're going to replace beer with policy, and we're making Howard a panelist, making Iris the moderator, and Bill stays in place for a discussion of the recent election and its implications for our political democracy and public policies going forward. So, and we're also putting the word policy first in the series title because over the next few months, we'll be hosting conversations with a number of talented TI co-congregants who work in policy realms such as climate change, healthcare, and the economy. So please keep your eyes open for announcements regarding those events. I am very pleased tonight to introduce our three panelists. Iris Lav is former Deputy Director of the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, where she created the State Fiscal Analysis Initiative, a network of nonprofit organizations that work on state budget issues in over 40 states. Iris taught public finance also, as well at Johns Hopkins and George Mason universities. Bill Galston is a senior fellow in the Brookings Institution's Governance Studies program and also writes a weekly column for the Wall Street Journal.
Are we up there?
Mike, I can't get the picture on.
Sherry, could you just mute people? Everyone, please mute yourselves. Before joining Brookings, Bill was a professor and acting dean at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. And Bill also served President Bill Clinton as Deputy Assistant for Domestic Policy from 1993 to 1995. Howard Gleckman is a senior fellow in the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center at the Urban Institute, where he edits the fiscal policy blog Tax Vox and the daily news summary, The Daily Deduction. He is also affiliated with the Urban Institute's program on retirement policy, where he works on long-term care issues. And before joining Urban, Howard was a senior correspondent in Business Week's Washington Bureau. So this event, we're going to run till 9 p.m. In the first part, Iris will facilitate a conversation with Bill and Howard. In the second part, the panelists will respond to questions and comments from you, the audience. And as last time, please submit your questions via chat, not through unmuting yourselves. Please keep yourselves muted throughout this conversation. And with that, I am pleased to turn the event over to Iris.
Thank you, Andrew, for organizing this and putting it together. And I'll be watching the chat and try to get to as many of your questions as possible, probably, for the last half hour of the program. We'll see how it runs. So let's start with a general politics question. What do you think, and this is for Bill to start, what are the most important election takeaways for the Democrats and the most important election takeaways for the Republicans?
Well, what a way to start, Iris. I could go on for hours, but I'm going to try to keep it very short. Here are the most important takeaways. First of all, this election was a split decision. Joe Biden won a victory which was very substantial by the standards of most recent presidential elections, an edge of 7 million in the popular vote, which works out to a margin of about 4.4%. that puts this victory in the upper tier of presidential victories in a period which has been marked by very narrow elections and by two presidents inaugurated without even a plurality of the popular vote, let alone a majority. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, this election was a sweeping victory for Republicans at every level below the presidential level. They, despite pressure on in a number of states, Republicans succeeded in holding on to all of the most hotly contested Senate seats. The only two Democratic victories were in states where where Democrats were considered to have something close to a sure thing. As most people know, as things now stand, there are 50 Republicans, 48 Democrats. It is possible that if Democrats win both of the runoff elections in Georgia on January 5th, they could control the Senate by the narrowest of margins, 50-50 with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking the tie. But everything would have to go right in order for Democrats, in order for that to happen. In the House, Democrats appear to have lost seats in double digits, against the expectations that they had that they would win an increased majority in the House of Representatives. Republicans gained a governorship. They did not lose a single state legislature, despite a really determined full court press by Democrats to turn over control of legislatures to have a greater say in the redistricting process than they had 10 years ago. So it was a split decision. It was a split decision that left very narrow margins in both the House and the Senate. And even if Democrats control the Senate 51-50, it will be very, very difficult to keep all 50 Democrats together for some of the more ambitious plans that were discussed during the campaign. And in the House, it will take a defection of only 6 or 7 Democrats to thwart Nancy Pelosi and the leadership's plans for ambitious legislation. So the final takeaway is that Joe Biden won this election with an extraordinarily broad coalition, stretching, as one person put it, from William Kristol, the former editor of the conservative Weekly Standard, all the way over to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. As we saw during the campaign, this created some interesting problems of coalition management, and it's clear during this transition period, and almost certainly be the case afterwards, that there will be a lot of jostling in Democratic ranks for control of the agenda. And this is going to require all of Vice President Biden's skills built up over half a century in national public life in order to manage a very diverse coalition. I could go on, but those are some key takeaways for me.
Iris, let me just add a couple of things. Bill was pretty comprehensive, but a couple of things. One thing that strikes me is, as Bill mentioned, the incumbent president of the United States just lost an election by 7 million votes. And he's still by far the most important person in his party. Usually, as Bill knows, you lose a presidential election and you become a non-person in your party. Nobody remembers who you were. And Trump still dominates his party, which is really quite extraordinary. The other thing, the other interesting dynamic that Republicans, I think, have is, I don't know, Bill, what would you say, 6, 8 Republican senators would love to be the party nominee for president in 2024. And they're all trying to jockey what they do in the Senate will be driven largely by their efforts to position themselves to run in that race. And of course, they're constrained by the fact that Trump says he's going to run, which makes their job a lot more difficult. Yet they're still going to be driven by that. Mitch McConnell, on the other hand, is going to be driven by what he's always driven by, which is maintaining his Senate majority. So I think it creates some very interesting dynamics for the Republicans in the Senate, which they have not had to deal with until now.
Yeah.
If I could just add an historical footnote, the only parallel that I can think of, well, I can think of two parallels to Trump's continuing influence in his party despite defeat. The first one will take us all the way back to William Jennings Bryan, the prairie populist who lost to William McKinley in 1896 and went on to get the nomination of the Democratic Party on two other occasions and remained the most influential man in the party, through, even after his second defeat, which in modern politics would have delivered the coup de grace to his political career. He was still there to get nominated a third time. The only person in modern times who's remarkably comparable to that is Adlai Stevenson, who was nominated to run against Eisenhower twice. And if he had really been determined to get the nomination in 1960, the year that JFK went up against Lyndon Johnson, he probably would have been able to, but he waited too long to make his intentions known. So this is not an unprecedented situation, but it's a very unusual one.
And I guess the lesson for the Republicans is that combined, those two candidates lost 5 presidential elections, which might say something for Donald Trump's future.
True.
Sort of put it out there.
But I think he is going to remain a major influence. And given that, what do you think Biden might do to enhance and ensure the nation's future as a democracy and address or reduce at least the existential anxiety a lot of people have been experienced because of the transgressive norms breaking and disinformation campaigns of the current administration? What can he do about the extent, what can Biden do about the extent and nature of political polarization going forward?
Well, I'll start this one and Bill can jump in. I think the one word answer is govern. I think if Biden can figure out a way to actually get some things done, some bipartisan legislation done, and we can talk about some of the places where he may go, infrastructure, that sort of thing, maybe even some healthcare. I think that simply by the fact of being able to do that, I think he will begin to reduce the temperature a little bit. As Bill said, there's going to be a lot of unhappy people on the left if Biden tries to govern from the center. And there's going to be a lot of people on the right who, no matter what Joe Biden does, they're going to believe he's a communist or a socialist or something. But I think there are a lot of people who can be had. And I think that Biden can sort of put this together by just accomplishing some things. It's simply governing. We've forgotten what that's like.
Bill?
Yeah, I agree with Howard. Biden has some things to build on. First of all, as we've seen during the past week, there are a bunch of very frustrated House and Senate members across party lines who would very much like, Congress to be able to legislate again. And so there's been a fascinating revolt against the party leadership in the name of bipartisan emergency COVID relief legislation that seems likely at this point to pass in some form. So that's one thing he has going for him. And I spent a lot of time talking with these people, and their frustration is really beyond words to express at this point. This isn't why they came to Washington. And I think they want to take matters into their own hands. Second, Biden in the early going has the opportunities to score some wins if he picks his spots carefully. Let me give you some examples. He could try for a comprehensive infrastructure bill. But given the price tag, I think it's going to be difficult to make a sale. But suppose he focused on some narrower piece of infrastructure like universal broadband. That's a proposal that appeals to Democrats because of low income voters in urban centers. It also appeals to Republicans because so many rural and small town voters have been shut out of commercial opportunities and also are experiencing great difficulties with remote education. So you might be able to put together a majority for that. Or take immigration. The president-elect has signaled his intention to propose comprehensive immigration reform to the Congress early on. I'm not sure that's his smartest move right now. Suppose he were to pick a piece of that, like DACA. I think he could get a legislative fix for DACA. And I know for a fact that there's some Republicans in the Senate who are even willing to vote for a clean DACA bill. That is to say, they would regularize the status of the Dreamers without asking for anything in return on the border or anything like that. So I could go on in this vein. I think the broader he goes, the more likely he is to hit a brick wall in the early going. I think he would be well advised to select important pieces of important public issues, build a consensus around them, and gain some momentum and demonstrate that governing is not a metaphysical impossibility, even in this polarized country.
Okay. More really political question. Are there election process changes or reforms that we need? Are we going to have to suffer with people challenging elections in the future? Will that be the new norm? Or so what can be done about that? Bill?
Who goes first?
Bill, go ahead.
Bill.
Go
You.
ahead, Bill.
Look, election administration in the United States is a good news, bad news story. We all know the bad news, but there is some good news staring us in the face. And that is our decentralized system makes it much more difficult for someone with anti-democratic tendencies simply to take over the system. Federalism is the enemy of autocratic centralization of power. That was one of the functions that it was designed to do. And as we've seen very recently, it has worked as advertised. The other piece of good news is that this sort of normless hyperpartisanship, which is so evident in Washington, has not trickled down to the states. You had a bunch of Republican officials who have done their duty, despite enormous pressure, some of it personally coming from the President of the United States, not to. And you've seen a judiciary which uniformly and almost unanimously has rejected claims that are without legal merit, despite the identity of the president doing the nominating. And perhaps the single most important decision on the electoral front so far was handed down by, a Third Circuit Court in Pennsylvania. That was, where the judge who presided over the case was a charter member of the Federalist Society, the Conservative Legal Society, and a fervent member of the National Rifle Association. And he wrote an opinion that I think could generously be described as scathing. So a lot of people in advance of the election were afraid that the rot went all the way down. And we've learned, fortunately, that it doesn't. Do we need electoral reform? We sure do. And starting with the governing law here, the Electoral Count Act of 1887, the title of the bill tells you everything you need to know about how adequate it is to current circumstances. And it was a mess 130 years ago. And it hasn't improved since then. So yes, we need that. But the only way we're going to get electoral reform, I'm afraid, is if neither political party can figure out who benefits from it. And that's not so easy.
Yeah, all those.
So
states.
So Ben Ginsburg, who represented George Bush in Florida in that disputed election, and who recently was quite critical of Trump's activities, wrote an interesting op-ed in the Post this morning, actually, about this, and raised a couple of issues that I think on a bipartisan basis or a nonpartisan basis could get some support. One of them was, as Bill said, that 19th century law was badly drafted. There's a lot of it that's just unclear, and it would make sense to clarify a lot of the issues. Another issue he raised, which makes a lot of sense, is in the Pennsylvania case, the Supreme Court was asked to rule on this question about whether the last word in state law, state election law, belongs to the legislature and the state election commissions, or whether it belongs to state judges. And Ginsburg suggested it might not be a bad idea for the Supreme Court to clarify that issue. And the third issue that he suggested, which I think makes a lot of sense, is that maybe we could find some national standards when it comes to mail-in ballots. So for example, could we set a national rule that said that mail-in ballots could be counted before Election Day? Mail-in ballots that arrive before Election Day could be counted before Election Day. Most state legislatures allowed that to happen, but a handful didn't. And it might make sense to address that issue so that we didn't have this problem where millions of votes came in after the election, after Election Day, and one candidate accused people of massive fraud. Bill, let me ask you the other question, though, which is, it isn't going to happen, but just to ask you if you think it is a good idea, what do you think about abolishing the Electoral College and just having a popular vote?
Boy, I could argue that one either way, Howard. But it strikes me, frankly, as such a remote possibility that I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it. I think that the kinds of changes that we are more likely to see will come through either national legislation as opposed to a constitutional amendment, or through the action at the state level. Let me give you an example. I believe that Congress could pass a law, though constitutional lawyers may disagree with me on this point, mandating that electoral votes be awarded by congressional district rather than as a block to the winner, the winner of the popular vote. And I think that would have a number of advantages. We've gotten used to a situation in which there are a handful of swing states and most of the other states get ignored. As we saw in the case of the two states that do award electoral votes by congressional district, both presidential candidates paid attention to a district in Maine and a district in Nebraska that they would have neglected otherwise. And since neither of those states was very competitive, Maine went to Biden by double digits, Nebraska went to Trump by double digits. Neither of those states would have even known there was a presidential campaign going on otherwise. So I do think that breaking up these blocks and awarding electoral votes by congressional district would be a step away from the kind of narrow swing state focused campaign we've seen up to now. Whether that would fundamentally alter the balance, or some people would say the imbalance in the Electoral College, is another matter altogether. And I'm going to have to run my proposal through a number of past elections and future scenarios in order to be able to deliver an answer to that question. But at least you'd have campaigns in all 50 states.
Okay. Remote, but maybe. So let's turn to what's going on right now, which is this so-called bipartisan stimulus package. So the setting is that most of the provisions of the CARES Act that was enacted in March, which most people would say prevented the economy from completely tanking, are about to expire. And that includes unemployment benefits for 12 million people and money for state and local governments, which are having increasing costs and falling revenues. But the 900 billion is also quite, I think, recognized by many people as inadequate. It may be what you can get, what's on the table now. So, Howard, I know you just wrote a blog on this. So if you want to comment on that, and also if this one passes, which is maybe, still a maybe, what are the chances of getting more adequate stimulus after Biden takes over? Because often once you've got one, you're not going to get another. This has happened in the past.
So I think, as everybody knows, Congress is incapable of acting absent a deadline. And it actually, the circumstances have created two deadlines for them that sort of meet at the same time. One of them, as Iris mentioned, is that a number of the provisions of the CARES Act expires in a couple of weeks. And the other one is that this large omnibus government funding bill also expires, actually, technically at the end of the end of this week. So that, combined with what appears to anyone with any economic sense is probably a double dip recession, or certainly a severe slowdown, as we see states shutting down again as COVID the pandemic gets worse. The confluence of all of those things, I think, is driving Congress to do something. I think the other thing that's changed is that Democrats were insisting on a much bigger bill than this $900 billion bill, because they were afraid that if Trump got reelected, this would be their last shot. There were a number of things that they wanted to put in this bill that may be meritorious, but had very little to do with stimulus. For example, an expanded child tax credit. Perfectly good idea, but probably not the sort of thing you normally put in a stimulus bill. Now, with Biden's election, I think the Democrats can credibly say to themselves that we can agree to a much smaller bill now, and we have a good chance of getting a second one at the end of January, the beginning of February, especially if the economy is actually as bad as a lot of the public health people think it will be. As far as the Republicans are concerned, I think the dynamic has changed there too. You started to see Republicans do, for the first time over the last couple of weeks, something they had not done at all in the last 4 years, which is begin to that what I call that red wall against a relief bill began to crack. You started getting senators who, like Democrats in the House, were very frustrated with their leadership and said, it is not acceptable for us to go home for Christmas without having done this. So you put that all together, and I think it adds up to a pretty high likelihood that they'll get a bill done. Unfortunately, what often happens with bipartisan legislation is it's not going to be very good legislation. I think most people would agree that the single most important thing that Congress could do is another round of stimulus checks. They get the money out to everybody. They could get it out very quickly. And that's apparently not going to happen. Instead, the main provision that they've got to assist people who really need the help is an additional unemployment benefit. The problem with that, it's well targeted to the right people. The problem with it is that they'd have to run the money through these state unemployment programs, which are a mess. And one of the lessons that we should have learned from what happened in March is the last entity you want to be distributing money for state unemployment programs. They're not only a mess, but there's tremendous variability, and Iris can probably talk, there's tremendous variability among the states. So if you have the good fortune of living in New York, you do fine. If you have the misfortune of living in Mississippi, you may wait 2 months before you get your check. So it's not a particularly effective way to do it, but kind of predictably what they did was they took the issues that were sort of at the top of all the members' hit lists or popularity lists, and then left this one out, which is unfortunate. But I think they'll get a bill.
Bill, you have different.
I think Howard has said 99% of what needs to be said about that bill. The 1% I would add is that this revolt against the leadership did not happen by accident. It was the result of a lot of organization in both the House and the Senate going back years in the case of the House and about 9 months in the case of the Senate. And I won't go into details as to how it happened, but the ground was carefully prepared in anticipation that it might be needed.
Mhm. Yeah, unfortunately, the unemployment system is controlled by the states, even though there's federal money in it, and it's been a mess for many decades, many decades. And on the other hand, a stimulus check is one time, and this is weekly money that people can get to live on through the unemployment insurance system. So, I mean, I would just add that. So talking about the economy, and it's really going to be, Lou, I think that issue is going to be overwhelm much of the beginning of Biden's tenure. You've probably seen that Mark Zandi of Moody's Analytics projects a double dip recession in early 2021. And that's if there's not a full, not a partial stimulus bill now. Companies would shed, according to Mark Zandi, companies would shed 3 million jobs in the first half of 2021. And he projects the unemployment rate would climb back to nearly 10%. But this would, of course, be followed by strong growth later in 2021 and 2022. I have a two-part question about that. What do you think of Biden's choices for his economic team? And what will we be able to do to lessen the pain if the projected recession occurs? We'll start that one with Howard.
So I've been answering this question the same way for nearly a year now. Question, what is it that the president can, what is the most important thing that the president can do to get the economy going again? And the answer clearly is not an economic question. The answer is clearly, you've got to get control of the pandemic. That in the absence of controlling the pandemic, there's no economic legislation that you can pass that will do anything but plug a hole in what is a very leaky dam. So the most important thing Joe Biden needs to do right now is manage the distribution of the vaccines. We began to learn over the last couple of days that the distribution is not going to go quite as smoothly as Operation, whatever Trump calls it, promised. That there are a number of complex issues involving distributing hundreds of millions of doses of drugs. So what Biden needs to do is get a handle on that. So that's the single most important thing you can do. After that, I think it is a matter of doing not a traditional stimulus bill, but a relief bill or possibly two relief bills that basically just keep people's heads above water, make it possible for them to continue to pay the rent and continue to pay their health insurance premiums. And for small businesses, make it possible for them to pay the rent and at least keep the doors open as much as they can. So I think those are the most important things. I think the longer term, big tax changes that Biden has proposed, those are for later. Those are for down the road. As far as Biden's economic team is concerned, I think it's quite strong. It's what you would expect from Joe Biden, which is a center-left group of advisors. They are, for the most part, people he has been working with for decades. Janet Yellen, who's going to be the Secretary of the Treasury, is a remarkable person. She's not a particularly political person, so I don't know that she will be playing necessarily the lead role in negotiating economic policy with Congress. But in terms of developing policy and being the adult in the room as people talk about it, you can't do better than Janet Yellen, who of course has been the chairman of the Federal Reserve. She's head of the Council of Economic Advice. I mean, she's done everything. I said in a column the other day, she is arguably the most influential public policy economist of our lifetime. I think you could do a lot worse than Janet Yellen in that position.
Yeah, I agree completely with Howard's analysis. Some of you have heard about Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Team of Rivals. This is the reverse. This is a team of teammates. These are people who know each other well, who have worked in government, who have worked with one another. And I would expect the team to function at a high level of professionalism and a very low level of internal conflict. The main problem is that, as in other areas, it's going to be difficult to do anything big. And the best case analysis for the Biden administration is that they win both of the Georgia Democratic races and then do something as big as possible and wrap it up into a reconciliation bill that they can jam through with a simple majority of the votes. But of course, you can't run that play very often. So I think that in the best of all possible worlds, they would remember what went wrong in 2009 and try to go big if they have the opportunity to do it, and front load everything because they probably won't get a second chance. And what should be in a big bill, we can have an interesting discussion about that, but that's the best case analysis, and it's all downhill from there. But Howard, I think you're absolutely right that this is the first downturn in our lifetime, and maybe in generations, that was occasioned by non-economic forces, and which will require, in the first instance, at the threshold, non-economic remedies so that normal economic activity has a chance to resume. And if we don't do that, we're going to be in the soup for a long time, I'm afraid.
One other quick point about the Biden economic team. It's interesting to me, and Iris will probably never forgive me for saying this, but it is overloaded with labor economists. It's remarkable. I mean, Janet is a labor economist. The CEA, senior members of CEA are all labor economists. And I think it sends a message about where Biden's priorities actually are. I would have liked to see maybe a healthcare economist or an international economist, or heaven forbid, a tax economist. But the leadership is all from the labor side. And I think that tells us that Biden is quite serious when he talks about doing things about inequality.
We were going to get to that. Yeah, the issue
Yep.
of equality, but also, of course, what you read in the press is people are complaining, oh, these people have have Wall Street connections. These people have, Silicon Valley connections. But you're right. There certainly are very strong labor people that he chose. So as we've said, the earliest we'll know the results of the Georgia runoff are January 5th, and probably not for a little while after that. So there are not a lot of people are thinking about what Biden can accomplish by executive action. And either if it turns out that the Republicans can control the Senate, unless the Democrats manage to win both of the Senate runoffs. So what do you think can be accomplished that way, or what do you know can be accomplished that way in terms of, say, tax policy, climate regulations, programs, whatever you want? What do you think of that strategy? And the second part of that is Trump is now using executive orders to create poison pills, landmines, and preemptions in an effort to limit Biden's options. So to what extent can Biden reverse Trump's decisions? Howard?
So I think you had a long list of areas where Biden can act or potentially could act. And I think it depends a lot on the subject. So for example, climate, Obama did a lot on climate through executive order. Trump did a lot on climate through executive order. And Biden will now undo what Trump did by executive order. It probably makes his life a lot easier that Trump was so sloppy in enacting many of his executive orders that they've been tossed out by judges around the country. So I think in areas like climate, like immigration, he can do a lot through executive order. Obviously not the topic today, but obviously foreign policy, he can change an awful lot without Congress, which seems to have abdicated all of its responsibility in foreign policy for generations now. Tax policy, it's a lot more complicated. You know, yeah, there's a little he can do around the edges, but I think as Trump found, it's a lot harder to do tax policy by regulation or by guidance. You need legislation. So there, I think Biden's going to need Congress.
Yeah, well, let me distinguish here between executive orders on the one hand and administrative action on the other in the form of regulation, because by definition, you know, executive orders are sandcastles built on the edge of the policy beach. And a president can, this is a slight exaggeration, but not much of one. What one president does by executive order, the next can undo by executive order. That is not a big problem. And you don't need the courts to intervene. You don't need to go through a complex process. And so it is quite traditional for incoming presidents on day one to, you know, nullify a bunch of the outgoing president's executive orders and to put new ones in place. No problem. But there are limits on what you can do through executive order. Another way of acting, which is more complicated and where the landmines and poison pills have been mostly planted, is in the regulatory area, because there is a law called the Administrative Procedure Act that new regulations have to comply with. But once they have complied with that, it is not so easy to get rid of them. For ones that have been enacted in the last few months of a president's term, there's something called the Congressional Review Act, which Congress can use in order to review and repeal very recently, finalized regulations. But for everything that was done in the first 3.5 years of the predecessor's term, or even 7.5 years in the case of a two-term president, there is no easy way to undo regulations. So I do think, particularly in the environmental area, the administration has great ambitions, but is likely to get off to a slow start because so much of this has been done through regulation. A final point, and this is my constitutional side, bursting out. I am personally, and I'm not alone, very unhappy about the way executive and, by the way, judicial power, has been stretched in the absence of a functioning Congress. And I don't think it's a good precedent to constantly expand, executive power. As we've seen, executive power is a double-edged sword, as is judicial power. And I think that Democrats would, in the long run, be ill-advised, just as Republicans in the long run would be ill-advised, to say, well, forget about Congress. Just constantly expand the president's power so that he can, for example, redeploy appropriated funds from their intended use for something else. That is, I think, not a good way to proceed. That comes very close to nullifying Congress's core power. And I would advise the president-elect to do his best to return to regular constitutional order.
I think one of the interesting questions that will come up is that the current majority on the Supreme Court has advocated very strongly for an expansion of executive authority. At least it did while Donald Trump was president. I think an interesting question is going to be, will that majority in the court continue to support that position when Joe Biden is president? And I think we're going to find out fairly soon how that goes.
Good question.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. So Biden has proposed a lot of expensive new policies. We haven't gone through them, but in terms of things he wants to do. Should he worry about budget deficits either for political or economic reasons? Now, of course, Republicans tend to be deficit hawks when Democrats want to do something and not when they want to cut taxes. But the hawks will reappear, I think. The deficit hawks will reappear for him. Is there anything legitimate about that? Should he worry about deficits?
I'm going to let my colleague from Business Week go first, and then the voice of the Wall Street Journal will speak.
It's been a while since I've been at Business Week, but nonetheless. So a document to think about very carefully is a paper that was just published by two very influential Democratic economists, Jason Furman, who headed the CEA for President Obama, and Larry Summers, who was, of course, Treasury Secretary. And they recently wrote a paper which really just amplifies things they've been talking about for some time, which essentially says, stop worrying so much about the debt. It's interesting that it's coming from that kind of, again, that sort of center-left faction of the Democratic Party. The left wing of the Democratic Party has been making this argument, the modern monetary theorists have been making this argument now for a couple of years. But now you're starting to get center-left Democrats who are making the same argument. It's not the same argument, but reaching the same conclusion, which is, don't worry so much about deficits, about debt. That if you are spending money for investment, just keep doing it and don't worry about paying for it. If you are spending money for short-term purposes, well, then yes, you probably need to find a way to finance it. But this kind of what me worry attitude seems to be spreading really through Democratic politics. And I think where it is going to have particular influence is Biden's tax plan, which of course is a two-piece plan. Half of it is a lot of new tax subsidies for low and moderate income people, but the other half of it is $3 trillion in tax increases on wealthy people and corporations. And it's going to be interesting to see whether Democrats try very hard to get those tax increases enacted. They have very little chance, of course, in the Senate. Even with a 50-50 tie, I think they have very little chance in the Senate. Certainly no chance with a Republican majority. But I'm not sure they're even going to try very hard. That's going to make people on the far Democratic left very unhappy. Of course, Biden never proposed a wealth tax. He's not a wealth tax guy, but he has proposed taxes on wealthy people. And the feeling I'm starting to get is that all may fade away. We may get tax bills, but those tax bills will include the first half of what Biden is proposing, which are tax cuts for low and moderate income people, and not worry so much about paying for it.
Yeah, I think Howard is right, but let me just offer an analogy from a related field, the stock market. Many analysts say that the time to start worrying about a bull market is when everybody is convinced, on one side. That is, people who are skeptical finally capitulate and say, yes, the market is going up. That's a classic sell signal. And so if we now have a situation in which the entire political system, believes the deficits don't matter, maybe it's time to re-examine our premises. Let me tell you what I'm worried about. The deficit now is not considered to be a problem because interest rates are so close to zero. Do we want to bet the future of the country on the proposition that interest rates will stay close to zero in perpetuity? It doesn't. You can do a back of the envelope calculation as to what happens to the federal budget if interest rates return to something like their historical norms. And it's not a pretty picture. So, there's all sorts of speculation in high economic circles. Have we entered a period in which interest rates are going to be permanently depressed? Are there structural factors? Professor Mankiw wrote an article in today's New York Times laying out some of the reasons why this might be a permanent new normal. But you could tell a story where there's a lot of inflation that's been pent up because of the pandemic. There is a lot of cash sloshing around. And if people decide that now is the time to spend it or invest it, you could see an inflation spike, which would have immediate consequences for interest rates, which would have immediate consequences for equity values, et cetera, this familiar domino. And I don't know how high a probability to attach, to these negative developments, but from my way of thinking, it's higher than zero. And right now, the political system is proceeding as though it's zero. This worries me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the paper that Summers and Furman wrote makes the same point that Mankiw makes, which is we've now had 30 years of historically low real interest rates. And at what point do you say that's the new normal? And as you say, Bill, there's always a kind of a nagging worry in the back of people's minds that will, what changed 30 years ago may change again. But their argument is, that I'm not necessarily defending it, but their argument is that after 30 years, we ought to just assume that this is the new normal. The other point to make is this discussion at the moment is theoretical only. Given the state of the economy, it is let's say implausible that Joe Biden is going to propose to raise taxes by a net of $2 trillion anytime soon. So he has this very ambitious domestic policy agenda that's going to cost a lot of money. And I'm not sure that he is inclined to try to pay for it, at least anytime soon.
My problem is that I think a lot of the policy discussion that we have been having and will be having in the weeks and months ahead will be much more theoretical than most people now believe. I wish that I could say something different, but frankly, I don't think a lot of the far-reaching Biden agenda as laid out in the Democratic platform and in the fall campaign is going to be enacted. I don't see how it can be. If the congressional portion of the 2020 elections had worked out differently, it would be a different ball game, but they didn't. So now what? Now what does he do?
Well, I think you're right, Bill. I think what he does, as Joe Biden would say, number one, the first thing he does is he gets on top of the pandemic. That's
Right.
going to take the first 6 months of his administration at least.
Right.
Then, as you say, I think then what he does is he picks and chooses a couple of issues where he can at least take a shot at getting a bipartisan consensus. And they're interesting because I think they work as a test case, right? That Republicans have been quite outspoken in the need to take your example of broadband. What if now that there's a Democratic president, they suddenly say, we're not even going to give him a victory on that? That's been an interesting experiment that Biden has now engaged in, and it tells him a lot about what it's going to be like to deal with Congress in the future. So it seems like you give it a shot, you see what happens, and if you can't get things like that done, well, you've learned something, and then you move on.
Okay, I think we're going to switch. There are a lot of questions in the chat, and I think we're going to switch. And one of them fits it pretty closely to what you're talking about. Jennifer and Josh asked Kiefer, the first 90 days of administration are widely recognized as the time when a president is most able to advance their signature policies. Obama chose to focus on healthcare and was never able to truly advance a climate agenda because of that. Clearly, COVID, including vaccine distribution and economic relief, necessarily have to be Biden's initial priorities. Do you think this will prevent him from making significant progress on other issues? That's sort
Yes.
of what we're talking about, but.
Yes. And let me add the other issue, again, not the topic of our discussion today, but the other issue where Biden has got sort of urgent work to do is foreign policy. And that's going to take up a lot of his time and energy as well.
Maybe there'll be one of these on foreign policy.
Hope so.
Back to what we were talking about earlier, Michael Novi asks, wouldn't selecting electors by congressional district make the presidential election vulnerable to gerrymandering?
As opposed to what? In other words, gerrymandering is going to happen, and it already exists. But right now, the electoral college has the effect of magnifying its impact, and I do think that we'd have a different kind of election if presidents had to compete everywhere. If I could wave a wand and create nonpartisan districting commissions in all 50 states, I would. The question is, how can we make things better given the fact that this is going to proceed in all probability on a state-by-state basis? So yeah, that is a current problem. It's a future problem. My proposal doesn't make that worse. What it does do is break up big blocks of votes into more competitive packages. I wish that there were more competitive congressional seats, but there are enough to make it more of a national contest than we now have.
So let's see. So there are a couple of questions that we're dealing with addressing income disparities. And Biden has said he wants to tackle growing inequality and racial justice. What do you think he can do in those areas? He has kind of a laundry list of things that I'm not sure that were in the campaign that, like opportunity zones and things like that, that I'm not sure contracting, they actually would add up. I'm not sure. What do you think?
So this is kind of a raise the bridge, lower the river issue, right? You talk to Democrats, there's sort of two ways that they want to deal with income inequality. One of them is they want to make poor people richer, and the other is they want to make rich people poorer. Joe Biden is clearly in the first camp. Joe Biden is not so interested in making rich people poorer, as opposed to, say, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, who wanted confiscatory taxes on the wealthy for the sake of confiscatory taxes on the wealthy. They think wealthy people have too much money. Joe Biden doesn't think that. Joe Biden thinks that poor people don't have enough money. And where he would deal with income inequality is in that area. So, for example, he wants to deal with education. I think most economists would tell you that the single most important thing you could do to improve the long-term circumstances of low-income people is to improve their education. And Biden is clearly there. He wants to provide refundable tax credits, essentially a way to get cash in the pockets of families with children, or also families caring for frail older adults, frail parents. So there's a number of issues like that. And I think that's where Biden would like to focus. The problem, to repeat ourselves as we've been doing for the last hour, the problem is getting any of that through a Republican Senate is practically impossible. Nonetheless, I think, and doing that by regulation is also impossible because you have to get more money into the system. So he's not going to get a lot of it done, but I think he'll talk about it. It'll probably be an issue in the 2022 election and be an issue in the 2024 election.
Yeah, let me just add a couple of items to that, Iris. First of all, I think many of us noted with interest that a state that gave Donald Trump a handsome victory, also voted by 61 to 39% to raise its minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Yeah.
And if I were Biden, I might adopt the slogan like, if it's good enough for Florida, it's good enough for the United States. And you know, I'm not saying he would necessarily win on that issue, but clearly there were a very large percentage of people who voted for Donald Trump in Florida also turned around and backed a $15 an hour minimum wage. And I think that he could really build a base for significant progress in that area, because I do think it's a majority sentiment in the country. And it's not yet a majority sentiment in the Republican Party, but it's getting closer. And why is this happening? Answer: because a party that used to rest heavily on the foundation of business support has now become more of a working class party. And it's understandable that a higher share of the Republican base would be interested in things that they see as being beneficial to working people who are really struggling. So I'm an optimist on that front. Here's another area. An issue that hasn't been bipartisan for a very long time, but has become so in the past couple of years, is criminal justice reform. There was bipartisan legislation in that area, and there was a follow-on bill in the Senate, as well as in the House, on further steps towards police and criminal justice reform. There's a lot of daylight between those two bills, but I know for sure that conversation is continuing on ways of bridging that gulf. And I think determined presidential leadership could probably bring about a second police and criminal justice reform bill, perhaps in his first 2 years. And if I were advising him to put some political chips down on the table, those are a couple of areas where I think he might be able to make some progress.
Yeah, agree. Let's see, what else do we have? So in terms of Michael Kraft wants to know, or Michael and Lisa Kraft want to know, are some small changes in Obamacare, some improvements likely? You know, Biden talked about building on Obamacare substantially, which, you know, as we've been talking tonight, he may not be able to get to. But are the Republicans too dug in even on small improvements?
So I think it's interesting when you think about Obamacare. Remember, there's two pieces of it. One of them is a Medicaid expansion, and by now, nearly all states, including most Republican states or many Republican states, have finally accepted that. So I think we'll probably see more of that. The other area, which of course is the health exchanges, I suspect there'll be some fiddling around with that, maybe some changes in the subsidy structure. Of course, we have to wait for the Supreme Court to see whether or not this question about the mandate has to get fixed. Conventional wisdom is it won't have to get fixed, but we'll have to wait and see what the opinion says. The other area I think where Biden may be able to make a little bit of progress is drug pricing, which has a lot of bipartisan support, at least in theory. The problem is, again, getting from the theory to the practice. I don't know if Jenny Bryant's on the phone, but Jenny could talk about that a lot. But it's a real challenge. Yet I think that there is a feeling that something needs to be done about drug pricing. And actually, Biden and Trump both were headed kind of in the same direction, a lot of technical differences. But this idea of somehow benchmarking U.S. drug prices, some kinds of U.S. drug prices, to a basket of foreign drug prices is an idea that seems to have a lot of support, not in the pharmaceutical industry, but elsewhere. So I think that there may be some places there where he could he might be able to make a little bit of progress.
You agree, Bill?
No, I agree with Howard.
So my husband's asking, managing COVID-19 vaccination effort will, as we've spoken about, major test for Biden improving if he can actually manage things. How do you see this evolving in terms of what he can do to actually make this happen, getting the vaccines out?
Well, I'm an optimist on this front, because of what Biden has been able to do in the past. As you recall, or as some people will recall, the American Relief and Recovery Act, which was the stimulus in 2009, had a lot of state and local projects. Biden was given the job of managing the implementation of some hundreds of billions of dollars in state and local projects, and it was widely regarded as a fiasco waiting to happen. But Biden and his team, impartial studies have confirmed this, did a very good, efficient, and scrupulous job of implementing it. Corruption, fraud, mismanagement were held to a minimum. And a lot of projects went ahead a lot faster than many people thought they would, despite the mantra, there are no shovel-ready projects, which is true, but not as true as the critics suggested. I'm an optimist that he can manage the distribution, delivery of the COVID-19 vaccine very effectively, in part because his chief of staff, Ron Klain, is way up the curve on healthcare crisis management and knows exactly how the trains can be made to run in Washington. I think in the same way that there's a strong economic team, there's a strong, experienced healthcare team forming up. And I also think that the Biden team understands that the logistical capacities of the U.S. military are going to be a very important building block here. And finally, unlike a lot of other things that we've been trying to do involving the federal government, states, and localities, vaccine distribution is not a blank slate. We've been doing it for a long time, annually in the case of flu vaccines. This will be much more demanding because of the storage requirements of some of the vaccines, particularly the Pfizer vaccine, which has to be stored at minus 70 degrees centigrade, which requires some special equipment, which the military is now helping to build and distribute. So I would guess that when we look back on this from the perspective of December of 2021, we're going to say that after a sputtering start, because the handoff from the Trump to the Biden administrations has been anything but smooth, this is going to look like a success story.
Yeah, I agree with Bill. I think that particularly, after the chaos of the Trump administration, I think just simply having an organized system, having a structure and a plan is going to make this a lot easier. Bill mentioned Ron Klain. The other guy that the administration brought in is a guy named Jeff Zients, who's also a veteran of the Obama administration, who is a technocrat. I mean, Jeff is a guy who understands things like supply chains. And I think that team, I think, will be very strong, and clearly was brought in with the intention of making sure that the rollout of the vaccines is nothing like the rollout of Obamacare. I think this is sort of a burned into their souls, and they're going to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
And of course, Jeff was the guy who fixed the Obamacare website.
Absolutely, that's exactly right.
That's not a job I'd wish on my worst enemy, but he did it.
Jeff seems to like this kind of thing. I'm glad he does.
Go figure.
Okay. So Ralph Miller asks, how useful a measure of tax policy would it be to provide better funding for the IRS? And would it be politically possible to do so?
So there's a huge argument among IRS experts and economists about what the return is on investment in the IRS budget. But there's no argument about the sign of that. Everyone agrees that there's a positive return and probably a fairly significant positive return. I do a bi-weekly webcast, and I did a webcast a month ago with Senator Rob Portman. And Portman is one of the Republicans in Congress who has been very involved in IRS reform and IRS budgeting. And I asked Portman whether or not he would support more funding for the IRS. And he said unambiguously, yes. So to me, that was a pretty good sign that Republicans are willing to go along with some more money for the IRS for enforcement, for what the IRS likes to call customer service. I will tell you, as somebody who filed a tax return on May 1st and is still waiting for his refund, I am a huge fan of the IRS getting some more money so it can do its job. It is really a struggle. Their budgets have been, in real terms, have been cut significantly. They're given more and more to do. Give them credit. They did a remarkable job distributing the stimulus payments last spring, but it took a lot away from them. They still have 1 million pieces of unopened mail that they're trying to get through, including, I guess, my tax return. Although I actually find my tax return electronically, so that's not even true. I think the IRS needs help. It needs resources. One of the things that doesn't get a lot of attention is just losing a lot of its most experienced people. Many agencies did during the Trump years, but the IRS has suffered a lot worse than many. A lot of the experienced auditors have retired. So they're going to have to spend some money, not only to hire people, but it will take a while, probably a matter of years, to get people up to speed so they can do the kind of complex audits of partnership returns and other things that are necessary to bring in some bucks.
Well, I'll drop a footnote to your own organization, Howard. You guys have done great work charting the percentage of tax returns in different income categories that are actually being audited in any particular year. And the decline has been in auditing has been particularly sharp, as I recall, among upper income taxpayers. And, I bet that there's a lot of low hanging return on investment in that sector of the American economy.
So let me just give you a quick example of what happens. So we've all read about Donald Trump and his tax returns. So let's, for the sake of argument, say, I'll just pick a number out of the air. Let's, for the sake of argument, assume that Donald Trump owes $200 million in back taxes. Because of the IRS funding problems and its lack of resources, what would happen to somebody like Donald Trump is he would underpay his taxes by $200 million. The IRS would eventually catch up with him. And then they would say, we'll take 50 because we don't have the resources to litigate this for the next 10 years. And because you got lawyers who are smarter and you've got way more of them than we do. So we'll just make a deal. We'll take 50 million and call 150 even. And you've got a taxpayer who's way ahead of the game. So that's where that loss of those highly experienced auditors comes in. It's a lot easier for them to audit, somebody with an earned income credit return because they know they're not going to fight them. They're just they'll get a letter audit that says you owe us $100 and they'll pay them the $100 and they'll be able to put a scalp on their wall, but without really generating very much money. So one of the reasons why audits of high income people have gone down so much is because the IRS just doesn't have the resources to do it, and they're too complicated.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to go back and want to go back and talk a little bit about another policy area, which is Social Security, Howard. What are Biden's proposals to improve the benefits and financing of Social Security? What do you think of them, and what do you think he can accomplish? I'm also totally fascinated by Biden, both in his tax proposals and also in Social Security. Seems to have redefined the middle class as people with incomes under $400,000, which is pretty amazing. But also maybe of more immediate concern to some people here, especially who work for the government. What do you think Biden will do about Trump's deferred payroll taxes that will come due next year?
I have no idea what they're going to do about the deferred payroll taxing. It is a complete mess. There's no good way to deal with this, and I don't know what they're going to do. Social Security is really interesting. So for decades, we have had politicians who have promised to make Social Security solvent. And without getting too geeky about this, what that generally means is the trust fund in balance for 75 years? And there have been various proposals that have been put out to do that. And of course, none of them ever went anywhere. What Joe Biden did was he said, you know what, I'm not even going to try. Because there isn't any consensus to do what we got to do to do this. We know that the Social Security Retirement Trust Fund, the old age piece of the Social Security Trust Fund, is going to be insolvent. It will be unable to pay all it's promised in 2035, in 14 years. It's starting to get close. So what Biden has said is, I've got a proposal that's going to extend it for 5 years. You know, not going to solve the problem, but at least it is a way to begin to make some progress. And what Biden has done is sort of bifurcated the issue. On one hand, he said, I have a series of proposals that will get more money to low-income retirees. So you're dealing with people who were low-wage workers through most of for all of their working careers, who get very small Social Security benefits, very low Social Security benefits. You're talking about people who are very, very old, who have reached the point in their lives where their costs of, for example, long-term care are going up. So maybe we can give them a few extra dollars. There's not that many of them because low-income people tend to not live that long, but there are some. And Biden says we should give them a little bit of a boost in their benefit. And then surviving spouses, there's also a proposal to give them a little more money. On the other hand, he would partially, but not entirely, pay for those proposals with this idea that Iris alluded to, which says that right now, the Social Security, you pay Social Security taxes on your first $137,800. I think that's what the number is. And then for income after that, for wages after that, you don't pay Social Security taxes. What Biden says is you would pay on your first $137,800, and then you would pay on any wages in excess of $400,000. It's a weird proposal because it creates this kind of strange donut hole. And it says that people making between $137,800 and $400,000 don't have to pay any more. But people making $400,000 or more do have to pay. It's a little crazy, but it's sort of done to kind of so he could keep his promise of not raising taxes on anybody less than making $400,000. And by the way, it's always good to remind people of this. The median income in the United States is $60,000. So $400,000 is way more than the median income. That's not your average American. But nonetheless, that's the number they came up with. Bill, you want to?
Let me, I'm going to respond in two ways. First of all, by out-wonking you, and then by making a political point. As I understand the proposal, that $400,000 is not inflation adjusted.
That's correct.
Which means that every year the hole gets smaller.
Right.
And eventually it will disappear.
Yes.
So, in fact, it's a shrinking hole. And I think that's part of the deliberate policy design. The political point is this: where have Democrats made their greatest gains? in the past couple of decades. Answer, in the educated professional class, which is upper middle class, not middle class, and in wealthier jurisdictions, has incomes that would be tremendously affected if they were taxed immediately on everything between 137,000 and 400,000. And I understand. I mean, that would be not just biting the hand that feeds you, but gnawing it, politically speaking. You really can't do that, given the current configuration of the Democratic Party. So you try to take that into account while trying at the same time to do the right thing. And this is one of the problems with the indiscriminate use of the term wealthy, because the real income and wealth in this country is not coming from people who work in law firms and make $250,000 a year, right? They're doing fine, but that's not where the major source of the income disparity and the report and the troubling power shifts that have occurred along with it is actually happening. So, by the way, could I take this occasion to acknowledge Ira Forman's superior historical knowledge? I think it's only appropriate. He shot me an email or a chat saying there was another three-time loser, namely Henry Clay, 1824, 1832, and 1844. As usual, Ira's history is impeccable, and I bow to it. Thanks, Ira, for enlightening us all.
Before my time, but I will rely on Ira.
Okay.
I knew Henry Clay. Henry Clay was a friend of mine.
So we have about 6 minutes left, so I can give you each 3 minutes to sort of sum up or what you go back over some of what you think the key points. Bill, you want to start? No?
Bill, go ahead.
Did you hear?
I'm sorry. You were breaking up as you were talking. Was that to me, to Howard?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, you heard that in each 3 minutes to sort of sum up and say what you want to say the last at the end of this program. Yeah, it was to you, Bill.
It was to me. Okay, I think I will take less than my 3 minutes.
Three.
And simply to say that, I think that all of the political skills and experience that Joe Biden has built up during the past half century are going to be tested in the first year of his administration. Not only, and Howard has emphasized this point, not only is there an enormous heap of problems on both the domestic front and the foreign front, but among his supporters, there's a tremendous mismatch between their expectations and a reasonable assessment of what he can accomplish. And he is going to have to do his utmost to persuade people that what he's putting on the table, although a far cry from what he pushed for during the campaign, represents the best that he can do at this point, and that we need patiently, to build a foundation for further advances, and to increase political support for some of the more ambitious agenda items. But among portions of the Democratic coalition, and particularly among young people, I think that the counsel of prudence, incrementalism, and patience will be a very bitter pill to swallow. I think they may spit it out, and we could be in a very serious situation as a country if the Democratic coalition that united to remove Donald Trump from office fragments over the legislative agenda during the first 2 years. That would open the door, I think, for really political chaos in the country. So this is, Joe Biden has an enormous responsibility on his shoulders in the next 2 years, and I'll be rooting for him, but it won't be easy.
Yeah, I really agree. I mean, what Biden is promising is a word that's not in good favor because of who used it last, but he's really promising a return to normalcy, kind of a sense of kind of returning to the norms that we expected of a president, and it's I think that will win him some brownie points, at least at the beginning. I think Bill's right, but I think he told just half the story. I think Biden is both going to have to manage expectations among Democrats and find a way to pick off enough Republicans on enough issues to actually get something done. I think there's a little bit of a sense that there's probably 6 to 10 Republicans in the Senate who, depending on the bill and depending on the circumstances, could be gettable. 10 may be too many, but at least a half a dozen who are gettable. One of the criticisms of Barack Obama, and I think it was legitimate criticism, was he never wanted to do the dirty work that was required to do that. And Joe Biden actually loves to do that work. And I think it creates some opportunities. I think Bill described the potential for chaos in the Democratic Party. I think the potential for chaos in the Republican Party is even greater. And I think it's possible that we'll be in a place as we head towards 2022 and 2024 where it's going to be every politician for themselves in the Republican Party. And I think that creates some opportunities for Biden to begin to pick people off. The last thing I'll say about Joe Biden is he will be considered a lame duck at 12:01 on January 20th. I think there are very few Democrats who expect that Joe Biden is going to run for re-election in 2024. And I think they're already going to begin to maneuver to figure out how that's going to play out. Kamala Harris obviously will have the inside track, but I think that's also going to create some complexities that normally a first-term president doesn't have.
Thank you so much, Bill and Howard.
Pleasure.
And Andrew?
Thank all three of you. Toda Rabah. And Tiferet Israel is very blessed to have your knowledge and expertise to be able to bring this kind of conversation for our community's benefit. So thanks to all three of you. To the audience, thank you for attending, and I hope you enjoyed and got a lot out of this very wide-ranging and perceptive conversation. As I mentioned, this will be the first in a series that we'll be doing and pulling on members of TI in healthcare. Bill mentioned Jenny Bryant, and
Howard did.
Howard did, and then Stan Dorn in healthcare, I hope. And we have lots of areas to focus on: healthcare, economy, Israel, foreign policy. So I look forward to seeing you on Zoom in next month for the next one, which an announcement will be forthcoming. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Many thanks.